The night began with a single message that shattered the calm. No one expected it to come from Julia. Her voice trembled through every word she typed. Something had happened, and she wouldn't say what. Not yet. Her friends sensed danger hiding between the lines. A secret she had carried for months was breaking open. The truth felt close enough to touch, but fear wrapped around it like a locked box. She asked them to meet at the old Riverside diner. No explanations. Just urgency. Just silence. When they arrived, Julia was already there. Eyes red. Hands shaking. She whispered that the story they thought they knew was a lie. A lie someone was willing to protect at any cost. And tonight, that cost had finally come for her. Julia kept her gaze fixed on the window as the neon lights flickered outside. The diner hummed with low voices and rattling plates. She barely noticed any of it. Her mind replayed the last 12 hours like a broken reel. Every detail scraped against her nerves. She had tried to stay calm, but the truth kept clawing its way out. Across from her, Daniel watched her with growing concern. He had never seen her this shaken. Not even during the darkest months last year. He asked her what happened, but she only pressed her lips together. Her hands wouldn't stop trembling beneath the table. Emma slid into the booth beside Julia and held her wrist gently. She told Julia to breathe, but even that felt impossible. Julia kept hearing that voice. Cold. Flat. Threatening without a single raised word. It had called her 6 times before she answered. She should never have picked up. But curiosity had won. And now she regretted it more than anything. The voice knew her name. Her address. The secret she swore she had buried forever. Julia felt her pulse jump as she remembered the final sentence. A promise wrapped in quiet malice. A promise that someone would come for her. She had hung up before the voice finished speaking. But she knew that wouldn't protect her. Secrets had weight. And hers had started to sink. Daniel leaned closer, lowering his voice. He asked if this had anything to do with the night at the cabin. Julia stiffened, but didn't answer. Emma exchanged a troubled glance with Daniel. The cabin had been their unspoken boundary. A line none of them crossed. Julia squeezed her eyes shut as memories surged forward. Rain. Screams. A flashlight beam cutting through the dark. The crash of something heavy hitting the floor. They had all agreed never to talk about it again. They had promised to act like it never happened. But promises didn't erase consequences. Julia felt her throat tighten. She told them the voice mentioned a name they all knew. A name they never thought they would hear again. Daniel froze, his fingers curling into a fist. Emma covered her mouth, eyes wide with dread. Julia whispered that the voice claimed he was still alive. The one they believed was gone. The one they left behind in the storm. Silence pressed down on their booth like a heavy curtain. Julia said the voice demanded a meeting. Tonight. Alone. Or the truth about the cabin would be exposed. Daniel swore they would not let her face this danger alone. Emma reached for Julia's hand again, steady and warm. But Julia could only shake her head. She said the voice warned her not to bring anyone. It knew everything about them. Every lie. Every fear. Julia's breath hitched as she realized the truth. Someone had been watching them since that night. Someone who wasn't supposed to exist anymore. And now, he wanted all 3 of them back where it began. At the cabin. In the dark. Daniel pushed his plate aside as fear settled over the table like fog. He kept glancing toward the door as if expecting someone to walk in. Julia's words echoed between them, sharp and impossible. Emma tried to steady her breath, but her chest rose too quickly. She asked Julia to repeat the name, hoping she misheard it. Julia whispered it again. And the room seemed to tilt. Emma gripped the table until her knuckles turned white. She remembered the storm. The mud. The way the cabin floor creaked beneath their footsteps. The look on his face before everything went wrong. Daniel muttered that it couldn't be true. He had checked. He had made sure. Julia's voice cracked as she told them the caller described the cabin in perfect detail. Even the broken lantern on the shelf. Even the scratch on the doorframe Emma made that night. Emma felt her stomach twist. No stranger could know those things. No outsider had been there. Daniel rubbed his hands over his face, trying to make sense of the impossible. He said maybe someone else had found the cabin afterward. Maybe someone had pieced the story together. Julia shook her head. The voice knew what they said. What they did. What they hid. Emma felt chills crawl up her arms. There had been no one else there. Just the four of them. And one of them had never walked out. Julia's voice softened as she described the tone on the phone. It wasn't angry. It wasn't wild. It was calm. Controlled. Like someone who had waited a long time for this moment. Daniel cursed under his breath and reached for his jacket. He said they needed to leave the diner before anyone else noticed them. Julia pulled her hand back, insisting they couldn't run from this. Emma watched the door again, imagining a shadow just beyond the glass. Daniel said they needed a plan. Not panic. Not chaos like last time. Julia said the caller gave her a time. Midnight. The word hung between them like a blade. Emma whispered that midnight was only 2 hours away. Julia nodded, eyes dim with dread. She said the caller wanted her to return to the cabin alone. Daniel slammed his palm on the table, making the silverware rattle. He said there was no chance she would go by herself. Julia stared at him helplessly. She knew the risks. She knew what disobedience could cost them. Emma reached across the table and took Julia's shaking hands. She promised they would face this together. Whatever waited for them there, they wouldn't repeat the past. Julia looked away, fighting tears. She whispered that the past was already repeating itself. Daniel stood, urging them to follow him outside. He said they needed to see the cabin before midnight, to understand what they were walking into. Emma hesitated, fear slicing through her resolve. But she rose anyway. Julia took one last, shaky breath before sliding out of the booth. She felt the weight of the night pressing on her shoulders. As they stepped out into the cold air, Julia glanced around the parking lot. A dark car sat across the street, engine running. And someone inside was watching them. The drive to the cabin was silent. Every turn of the wheels seemed louder than the last. Daniel kept checking the rearview mirror. No tail. Yet the feeling of being watched never left. Emma clenched her seatbelt as shadows stretched across the road. Julia stared straight ahead, lips pressed together. Her mind raced with every memory from that night. The storm. The shouting. The panic. Every sound, every flash of lightning felt alive again. Daniel finally spoke, his voice low. He asked Julia if she remembered any signs. Any warning that something would come back for them. Julia shook her head. It all seemed buried. Hidden. Until now. Emma broke the silence, whispering that maybe someone had survived. Maybe the one they thought was gone had waited all this time. Julia's eyes widened. She didn't want to imagine it. But the caller's voice had made it impossible to ignore. Daniel slowed the car as the trees grew thicker. The familiar outline of the cabin appeared through the darkness. It looked smaller than they remembered. Yet the sense of danger felt larger. Julia swallowed hard, gripping the seat edge. She told them the caller said everything would be clear once they returned. That they would understand why it all happened. Emma looked at Daniel. She asked if they could just turn back. Daniel shook his head. No. Not after everything. They had to face it. Julia stepped out of the car first, her boots crunching on the frost-covered ground. Daniel followed, scanning the tree line. Emma hung back for a moment, taking a deep breath. She stepped forward, joining them near the cabin door. The lock had been broken. The door hung slightly open. A cold wind slipped out, carrying an almost familiar smell. Smoke. Ash. Julia's heart sank as she stepped inside. The cabin was quiet. Too quiet. Daniel moved to the living area. Emma followed, eyes darting to the corners. Everything looked untouched, but nothing felt normal. Julia pointed to the corner of the room. A small, scratched mark on the wall. Exactly where it had been years ago. Daniel knelt, examining the floorboards. They were scuffed. Fresh marks ran across the old wood. Emma's voice trembled as she whispered that someone had been here recently. Julia felt the tension coil in her stomach. She heard it again. A soft creak upstairs. Slow. Deliberate. Daniel raised his hand, signaling for silence. They all froze. The air seemed to thicken. A shadow moved across the staircase. Not quite human. Not quite gone. Julia's breath hitched as she realized the truth. The past was waiting, and it had never really left. Emma stepped closer to Julia. Daniel slowly reached for a nearby flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, landing on the staircase. Nothing. But the feeling remained. Someone was watching. Someone was ready. And they were not alone. Julia whispered the caller's final words in her mind. Tonight, you will see everything. The night stretched ahead. Long. Cold. And filled with a danger that would not forgive. Julia's hands trembled as she reached for the staircase railing. The wood was cold beneath her fingers. Every step echoed through the silent cabin. Daniel followed closely, flashlight cutting a narrow path ahead. Emma stayed behind, scanning the room for any sign of movement. The air felt thick, almost alive. A low hum seemed to vibrate through the floorboards. Julia's breath hitched as the humming grew louder. She froze. Daniel whispered for her to keep moving. But she couldn't shake the feeling someone was waiting above. The hallway stretched endlessly in the dim light. Doors stood closed, hiding secrets they couldn't yet face. Julia hesitated at the first door. Her hand hovered over the handle. A memory flashed. Screams. A shadow moving too fast to follow. She swallowed hard and pushed the door open. Inside, nothing had changed. Except for the floorboards. Scratched, scuffed, like someone had dragged something heavy across them. Daniel knelt, examining the marks. Julia leaned closer, heart pounding. Emma's voice came from below, shaky but firm. She warned them someone might be in the cabin now. Julia nodded, but couldn't turn back. The voice from the phone replayed in her mind. You will see everything tonight. Her hands shook as she pushed open the next door. Darkness swallowed them. The beam of Daniel's flashlight cut through only a few feet. Then they saw it. A symbol etched into the wall. Fresh. Sharp. Familiar yet twisted. Julia's stomach dropped. She recognized it immediately. The same mark from the night they left the cabin. Emma stepped closer, her voice trembling. She whispered that they weren't alone. Daniel tightened his grip on the flashlight. They moved cautiously down the hallway. A door at the end stood slightly ajar. Julia's pulse raced. Daniel gestured for silence. They approached together. A faint sound drifted from inside. Breathing. Slow. Intentional. Julia's chest tightened as she realized the sound was not coming from her friends. It was deeper. Older. Watching. She whispered their names. No answer. The door creaked as it moved slightly. Julia and Daniel froze. Emma whispered for them to back away. But Julia couldn't. She stepped forward. Then a figure emerged from the shadows. Tall. Still, eyes glinting in the flashlight beam, the memory of that night came rushing back. The face they thought they had buried in the past. Alive. And waiting. Julia stumbled back, heart racing. Daniel positioned himself between her and the figure. Emma's voice was barely audible. "Who are you?" The figure stepped closer. A smirk crossed his face. No words. Just the presence of someone who had returned to settle old scores. Julia's mind raced. The storm. The screams. The choices they made. All leading to this moment. The figure raised a hand slowly. Daniel tightened his grip on the flashlight. Julia felt the weight of everything pressed down on her. This was the truth the voice promised. The past had come back, and it wanted them to face it. The figure took another step forward, and the floorboards groaned beneath him. Julia's heart pounded in her ears. Daniel tightened his grip on the flashlight, refusing to blink. Emma's voice shook as she asked if he remembered them. No answer. Only a slow, deliberate smile. Julia swallowed hard, trying to find words. The storm. The cabin. The night they thought they had left behind. It all came rushing back. The figure raised a hand, pointing at Julia. A chill ran down her spine. Daniel stepped in front of her, shielding her. The figure's eyes glinted with recognition. A laugh escaped him, low and menacing. Julia realized he had waited all these years. For them. For her. Emma's hands trembled as she tried to reach Julia. The figure ignored her, focused entirely on Julia. He spoke then. A voice calm, controlled, chilling. "You left me behind." Julia's mouth went dry. She opened it, then closed it again. The memories of that night pressed in. Daniel asked why he was still alive. The figure tilted his head, considering. Then he spoke. "Did you really think I was gone?" Julia's legs felt weak. Emma stepped closer, pleading for mercy. The figure laughed again, sharper this time. "You all promised silence. You all promised the past would die. But it didn't. It waited." Daniel's voice rose, demanding answers. Why now? Why return? The figure's smile widened. "Because you forgot me. Because you forgot what happened in this cabin. And now it's time to remember." Julia's chest heaved. She whispered that they had no choice. That they had to survive. The figure moved closer, deliberate and slow. Each step measured. Each breath heavy. Daniel raised the flashlight higher, beam cutting through the dark. Julia's mind raced. The symbols on the walls. The scratches on the floor. Everything pointed to him. Emma tried to distract him, stepping into the beam. But he ignored her, focused only on Julia. The air grew colder. Thicker. A sense of inevitability pressed down. Julia realized they could not outrun this. Not tonight. Not ever. The figure spoke again, softer now. "But you can fix it. You can face it. If you are brave enough." Daniel whispered to Julia to stand tall. Emma clutched her friend's arm tightly. The figure's gaze never wavered. He stepped back slightly, gesturing toward the center of the cabin. Julia understood the unspoken challenge. They had to confront the past. Together. Daniel nodded, signaling he would protect her. Emma breathed deeply, readying herself. The figure's eyes held them in place. The weight of years, secrets and guilt hung in the air. Julia whispered, almost to herself, that this was the moment. The moment to face the truth. The figure smiled faintly, as if approving. The cabin seemed to hold its breath. Everything was about to change. And nothing would ever be the same again. Julia took a shaky step forward, facing the figure in the center of the cabin. Her hands were trembling, but her eyes were fixed. Daniel stayed close, flashlight steady in his grip. Emma hovered beside Julia, whispering words of encouragement. The figure's gaze never left her. He spoke again, voice low and dangerous. You thought silence would protect you. You thought the past could be buried. Julia swallowed hard. I didn't leave you. We didn't know you survived. The figure tilted his head, considering her words. His expression was unreadable. Daniel's voice broke the tension. What do you want from us? The figure's lips curled into a thin smile. Recognition. Acknowledgement of what happened here. You can't erase it. Julia took a deep breath, feeling the weight of years pressing down. I remember. We remember. We can face it together. The figure stepped closer. Emma's voice shook as she added, we never meant to hurt anyone. We never meant to forget. A pause. Then the figure nodded slowly, almost imperceptibly. You must understand the truth. The cabin, that night, it changed everything. Julia's chest heaved as the memories came rushing back. Daniel encouraged her silently. Face it. Julia closed her eyes, letting it all come forward. The screams. The storm. The fear. The choices they made. She opened her eyes and spoke the names of everyone involved. The figure listened, silent. The air grew heavier, as if the cabin itself was waiting. Then he spoke again. You are finally admitting it. Finally facing the consequences. Julia's throat burned. She nodded, unable to find more words. Emma whispered that they would make amends. They would not hide the truth any longer. The figure moved to the scratched wall, traced the marks with his fingers. He looked at Julia, eyes sharp. You will survive, but only if you carry this memory. Only if you never hide again. Daniel stepped closer, ready to intervene if needed. But the figure shook his head. No. You must face it yourselves. Only then will it end. Julia felt a strange calm settle over her. For the first time in years, she understood the weight she carried. The guilt. The fear. The silence. Emma's hand squeezed hers. They were not alone. The figure took a final step back. And for the first time, he smiled genuinely. You remember. You face it. That is enough. Julia exhaled, feeling the tension release slightly. The cabin felt different now. Heavier, yes. But quieter, too. Daniel lowered the flashlight, shoulders relaxing. Emma wiped her tears, relief flooding her. The figure turned toward the staircase. Then he was gone. No sound. No warning. Just empty shadows. Julia, Daniel, and Emma stood together, breathing heavily. The past had returned. They had faced it. And somehow, it was over. The night still lingered. Cold and dark. But the weight of secrets was lighter now. Julia whispered that they would never forget. But they would survive. Together. The cabin remained silent. The storm outside had passed. And for the first time, they stepped forward without fear. The first light of dawn filtered through the trees. Julia, Daniel, and Emma stood outside the cabin, exhausted but alive. The air felt different. Lighter. Freer. Julia looked back at the dark silhouette of the cabin. It held memories, pain, and secrets. But it no longer held power over them. Daniel broke the silence. He said they had faced the past. And now they could move forward. Emma nodded, tears in her eyes. She whispered that they were stronger together. Julia felt the weight lift from her shoulders. Years of fear, guilt, and silence began to fade. The world beyond the cabin seemed brighter. They started walking down the path, side by side. No words were needed. Their bond said everything. The forest behind them was quiet. No shadows. No whispers. Just the memory of what they survived. Julia realized that courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision to face it. And they had all chosen courage. The sun rose higher, warming their faces. The cabin faded behind them. A dark chapter closed, and a new one began. Together, stronger, free.